Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of September. This month I read 6 books. 5 of them were graphic novels and manga, 1 of them was nonfiction, and then I started or worked on several. So I'll start off talking about the graphic novels and manga. I started 2 different manga series and read 2 volumes of each. The first one of those is Boys Run the Riot. Boys Run the Riot focuses on Rio, who is a closeted trans man. He ends up teaming up with this kind of weird new kid in his class in order to start a clothing brand. As much as there's the plot regarding the clothes and different things like that, there's a lot in here about learning to embrace yourself, even if it's totally different from the rest of the crowd. So I really loved this, and I just got the 3rd volume, so I'm super excited to see what happens, because the second left off on a little bit of a cliffhanger. The other manga series that I started was Doughnuts Under a Crescent Moon, and this was so good. Both of these series were excellent, and both of them went into depth with the characters in a way that I didn't really expect from a manga. Like, it felt deeper. Maybe it was because I related to different pieces of the characters, and so maybe that's me. But regardless, this is super cute. This is basically a slow burn romance between 2 co-workers. The main character has a lot of anxiety, and at the core really doesn't get why a lot of people act the way that they do or want what they want. I read her as very autistic coded, and she talks about dealing with compulsory heterosexuality. They don't use those words, but that's basically what's going on with her at the beginning of this. And then she starts to get closer with her coworker, who's kind of a loner, and they develop this really wonderful friendship where they kind of show each other parts of themselves that they don't really show other people. They kind of let their guard down. And so they're kind of embracing the side of each other that they've been afraid to show other people, while also encouraging each other to get better at certain things. It's the most wholesome, healthy, beautiful, I don't know. I just had a lot of feelings. It was really cute. I'm kind of mad that I have to wait till February to get another volume, but that's okay. So both of these series were super wonderful and talked about personal growth and self-acceptance in ways way beyond what I was expecting. So I definitely highly recommend those. Next, I have a standalone graphic novel, and that is Ghost World, which is what the movie was based off of. I recently saw this movie for the first time, probably in August. I don't really know what time is. I think in August. And after I watched the movie, I wanted to read the comic, especially because I had heard that there were kind of a lot of differences, and they did some interesting things with the characters. There's basically one of the characters in the movie is an amalgamation of multiple people from the graphic novel, and I thought that sounded really cool. And it was really good. After I read this, I watched Ghost World again with Brianna from Rad Reads, who also told me about Ghost World to begin with. I really enjoyed watching the movie, reading the book, and the whole analytical experience. At face value, the story is about a girl who just graduated high school and is faced with the fact that she has to grow up and is expected to go and basically do the same thing that everyone else is. And there's a certain emptiness to those expectations. There's an emptiness in the town around her. And, it's directly talking about, growing up, but also capitalism. And I think it's also dealing with compulsory heterosexuality as well. I think that the movie, just from kind of what I saw, the movie, I think, focuses more on the capitalism, the, like, modern America, like, big box stores, kind of disillusionment with that kind of a thing, where the comic looks more at compulsory heterosexuality, or at least more obviously. I picked up the themes in the movie as well, but it's a lot more clear-cut in the comic. So there's a lot of interesting things thematically. I will say there is a lot of, like, homophobia and anti-Semitism and misogyny, and a lot of negative things that the main character has against herself as a closeted lesbian Jewish woman. So she is definitely externalizing that on people, so there is a lot of, like, crass stuff happening there, so definitely be aware of that. And that's another thing, that if you do just take it at its face value, just as a story about a couple of weird girls who just got out of high school, like, that would be, it would probably not be great, especially because they say all of this kind of, like, offensive stuff and, like, make fun of people, but, when you put it in context with the themes and what the character is actually going through, it makes a lot of sense. I thought it was really interesting, and I had a great time totally overanalyzing it, and being able to talk about it with a friend. So that was that. It's hard to say whether or not I would recommend it to someone who wasn't already invested in, like, the movie and everything, or invested in picking stuff apart like that, just because I would need to read it and really think about it again. I enjoyed it. My star rating was based off of my enjoyment, not necessarily whether or not I would recommend it to someone, just because I would, I think, only recommend that to certain types of readers. Finally, I have the nonfiction that I finished, which was Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, a primer by Jose Maria Sison. And these are some of the writings that he did when he was in jail in the Philippines. He was one of the leaders of the Communist Party in the Philippines. If you want to know more about him, I listened to a podcast that he was on Guerrilla Radio, I think. I'll put the link in the description. But in this, he goes really detailed into a lot of concepts that Marx and Engels and Lenin bring up, and talks a decent amount about Mao and China. And he also talks about a lot of this in context with where he's at the time that he's at. So you're not, just looking at the things that they came up with, 100 years ago, but he also gets to talk some about what has happened since then. I thought that a lot of the framework was interesting. I did find pieces of this a little bit hard to parse through, but I think that just might be my brain. You see how many books I've been able to get through, so I'm clearly having a problem compared with what I usually do or have done in the past. So some of it was a little bit difficult, but I think that's just because I'm not used to looking at, like, political economy. However, while there were definitely those chunks of it that were kind of hard to get through, there were also chunks that were, like, too relatable. Like, they were happening when Marx and when Lenin were writing, continued to be more relatable during his time, and then continue to, like, just go on that same trajectory, like talking about monopoly capitalism. It has just gotten worse. People have just become more reliant on capitalism. Interesting and important frameworks, relatable stuff. Some of it was a little bit dense. I feel like I don't know enough to have any, like, specific critique. I'm still kind of learning about the stuff to get my head wrapped around it. But I do know that this is a work from an important figure, it was a good time to get through, and it was really cool to be able to hear about his experiences afterwards as well. That really contextualized this. That was September, so far as what I finished. So far as stuff that I worked on, continued the buddy read. Don't have much extra to say, but that is something that I worked on, though You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell. I started Iron Widow, and I'm going to need to finish in the next couple of days, but it is really good. It is really intense. I'm not used to reading high fantasy, but thankfully it's not too much. That's not to say that I understand every aspect of the world, but it's not too much, and it's very fast-paced. The initial plot of the book is that the main character lives in this world where women are treated terribly. One of the things that they can do to bring a lot of honor on their family is to go off to war and basically be batteries for these mechs that are at war, and most of them end up dying pretty quickly. The main character's sister goes off to do that and gets killed by one of the pilots, not in war, but just in general. So the main character decides that she wants to go and kill that man. So that's what she's doing. She's, at the beginning of the book, she's going to go be recruited into the army under that guy. And boy, does it take off from there. I'm not super far into it, but it is really good so far. I also started The Gentrification of the Mind by Sarah Schulman. This is part memoir, part social analysis. Sarah Schulman is talking about her experience during the AIDS epidemic. She's talking about not just what she was doing, but it's her memory of the people around her. The whole premise of this is she is looking at the role of gentrification as it relates to the AIDS epidemic. For part of it, she is talking about actual cities gentrifying and how landlords took advantage of the fact that people were dying, and that contributed to gentrification. But she's also talking about the gentrification of ideas, the gentrification of mourning. There's this kind of idea that there are certain people who you are allowed to mourn for, and those, of course, are not going to be primarily gay or people of color. I've got a section in here that I think illustrates that. She uses the example of 9/11 as one of these instances of kind of gentrification, and kind of the dichotomy of people who were allowed to mourn or to be mourned versus the people who are not. Should I wait until I finish reading this to share? Probably. I'm probably going to do a whole video on it, but I'm going to share this anyways because it's on my mind, and I want to. So, she says, and this is kind of like maybe a chunky passage, but she says, 81,542 people have died of AIDS in New York City as of August 6, 2008. These people, our friends, are rarely mentioned. Their absence is not computed, and the meaning of their loss is not considered. 2,752 people died in New York City on 9/11. These human beings have been highly individuated. The recognition of their loss and suffering is a national ritual, and the consequences of their aborted potential are assessed annually in public. They have been commemorated with memorials, organized international gestures, plaques on many fire and police stations, and a proposed new construction on the site of the World Trade Center, all designed to make their memory permanent. Money has been paid to some of their survivors. Their deaths were avenged with a brutal and unjustified war against Iraq that has now caused at least 94,000 civilian deaths and 4,144 military deaths. The deaths of these 81,542 New Yorkers who were despised and abandoned, who did not have the rights or representation, who died because of neglect of their government and families has been ignored. This gaping hole of silence has been filled by the deaths of 2,752 people murdered by outside forces. The disavowal of grief, 20 years of AIDS deaths, was replaced by ritualized and institutionalized mourning of the acceptable dead. In this way, 9/11 is the gentrification of AIDS. The replacement of deaths that don't matter with deaths that do. It is the centerpiece of supremacy ideology, the idea that one person's life is more important than another's, that one person deserves rights that another does not deserve, that one person deserves representation that the other cannot be allowed to access, that one person's death is negligible if he or she was poor, a person of color, a homosexual living in the state of oppositional sexual disobedience, while another death matters because that person was a traitor, cop, or office worker presumed to be performing the job of capital. So, that's Gentrification of the Mind. It's really interesting so far. I do have some critiques. She has yet to really talk about colonialism, even though that's, like, gentrification is just an iteration of colonialism. So I'm interested to see what the rest of it is and kind of where she goes with that. The pieces where she's bringing in the memories of the people that she was friends with is heavy, but important, and I think it feels very vulnerable because it's very true. She's not sugarcoating pieces of these people. The way that they're represented is very brutally honest to her perspective. And that's the thing about memory, too, is that it's colored by the rememberer. And I think that's pretty clear in this. And she's mentioning a lot of people, well, some people that I wasn't able to find writings of. But one of the people that you mentioned, I actually do have his memoir, Queer and Loathing, by David Feinberg. So I'll probably set up to read that sooner rather than later. My brain is getting away from me. This is very good so far, even if I do have some critiques. And I'm looking forward to finishing it. I've also started Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. I have only read the introduction, but the intro has made me even more interested in reading the rest. It basically gives background on who Aimé Césaire is, what impact his writings have had. Also talks about the impact of surrealism, how that's, like, put in here, and how this is as much about, like, poetics, which I wasn't anticipating. I didn't really know what I was expecting other than, obviously, talking about colonialism. So it's, I don't want to say too much because I haven't actually started the piece that he's written. But I'm excited for it. I could probably knock it out in a sitting or two. But it should be good to continue. And then the last book that I'm going to talk about, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but the last book that I'm going to, no. I have another fiction book that I started, that unfortunately I had to return to the library, even though I was really liking it. 1,500 Miles from the Sun by Johnny Garza. This was really cute so far. I thought that it was, well written to the point that I got into. The whole premise is that the main character is a closeted gay boy, and he ends up getting drunk and outing himself on Twitter. And one of his Twitter crushes ends up DMing him. So, that's the premise. It was a really cute setup. I just didn't finish it because my brain's not working, and it was a week late to the library. So I will read it at some point. I will finish it. Just not now, apparently. And the final book that I have is not one that I would read from back to back, cover to cover, but it's one that I've been using, and I've read most of the little sections so far. The only astrology book you'll ever need. I will probably put it as read on Goodreads by the end of October. The only, there's a chunky piece of it that talks about history that I haven't read, but I think once I've read that, I will have effectively gone over most of it. This isn't something that you would read cover to cover because it acts as like a dictionary for like your planets and placements and stuff like that. So I'm not going to sit and read all of it, but I have been going over several people's charts. I read another astrology book last month that I talked about a little bit. I've been doing people's charts. I've been working on some friends' charts, some families' charts. It's been a really good time. I'm having fun with it. But I think that is all so far as what I wound up reading. So far as readathons go, Sapphic September was pretty successful. Sci-fi September, less so. And Latinx book bingo is still going on. I'm going to be working on a book other than 1500 Miles from the Sun for that, just because of the whole library situation. I think those were the only readathons. So that was my reading month. So if any of you have read these, let me know what you thought about them down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.